I am Ben Manski. I am an assistant professor of public sociology here at George Mason University. I direct our fairly new program still in Next System Studies at GMU. And I'm here as a chair, but not as a presenter for this particular session. So I'm just going to say a very little bit just to frame out what we'll be talking about, and then I'm going to introduce our first panelist. So the question that this panel is taking up follows on the question that we were taking up in the last panel. The last panel took on the question of taking the system crisis seriously. As the world collapses around us, can we build the next GMU? Can we build the next university that will address the system crisis? Right? And that's what we're here to talk about today in this time of cascading system crises. What are our responsibilities as GMU students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members? Who and what should our university serve, and how can we deliver that kind of university? So our panelists today will be Hanaan Kazia, who is a third-year undergraduate student in government and sociology here at GMU and was a Next System Fellow last year and is an activist with the Young Democratic Socialists of America here at GMU. Alyssa Cazier, who is a second-year PhD student in our public sociology program here at George Mason University, and also an active member of the American Association of University Professors, AFT Local 6741, and my colleague, Dr. Bethany Letiecq in the Ed School, who is president of our unit, of our union, the American Association of University Professors, and who has been leading the fight for a democratic university here at GMU for many years. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I'll just say that, as a few of you know, and others will learn as you get to know me better, I come out of the Wisconsin tradition, a state where state law has enshrined the idea that the borders of the university are the boundaries of the state, and that the purpose of the University of Wisconsin system, a public university system, is to take the side of ordinary people and helping them to live full lives and to be full citizens in a genuine democracy. That's how a lot of us understand the Wisconsin idea. So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing us talk about here today. And so the opening question I have for each of you is, how does your commitment to a democratic, just, and sustainable university, how does that manifest? What does that look like? And how do we get there? So please welcome Hanaan Kazia. And actually, if you can come up here just for the sake of the video and for people at home, and then when we get into the back and forth, we can remain seated. Thank you, Hanaan.
I had to bend it down because I'm quite short. But hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to Ben for inviting me onto this panel. It's a really great honor to be here. So I think with the question of what my commitments personally look like, I think that I often think in the framing of the fact that universities are a place of contention over power, specifically, but also contention over truth. What does truth look like? When you come to a university, you're taught specific ways of seeing the world, ways that make the world true in a certain way. How was this country founded? What are the institutions that underline our society? What are they based on? Who do they value? All of these kind of things. So when I think about what my commitment to building a university, to being a member of a university looks like, it's prioritizing making sure that universities continue to be a place where truth can truly be shared. Because I think that we see, especially in this moment, but also throughout history, that universities are such a fraught place of contention because people realize this, right? They're places for social reconstruction and reproduction. They're places, where a lot of us come out of small communities, our hometowns, our neighborhoods, our families, and we're suddenly exposed to a much bigger world, right? So the idea is that when we're committed to reshaping our university, we're also committed to reshaping how people behave, how they act, how they go into society, what they prioritize, all of that sort of stuff. So the way I think about it right now is as a student and as someone who's focused on organizing student power, we face this question of the university is this place of social reconstruction, but who gets to decide what we're shaped into becoming, right? Who gets to decide what curriculum we have, what ideas we're taught, all of this sort of stuff. And the fact is, even though students make up the largest population in this university, we get very little say in that, right? We, the university would not be the university without students, but our participation in the power structures of the university are mostly a rubber stamp or symbolic or performative, right? Even though it's important to have structures, for example, like student government, like RSOs, or registered student organizations, stuff like that, where we can organize, where we can teach each other, and where we can learn, the question is that really making a change on the system? And how can we make it have a change on the system? So I think what I see as a necessity is really organizing students as realizing our power as students and also our importance as students. We don't really recognize that we have a specific power, a specific ability, and specific interest when we're in a university. We just think of ourselves as here to learn, as here to become products for entering the workforce, right? But what we need to realize is, I believe that as students, we have extremely specific powers and positionalities that we need to utilize and that we need to enforce upon universities to make them more just and democratic and sustainable, because ultimately we have the biggest stake in the university, because we're for most of our cases we're paying for this. Even if it's not in money, we're paying our time to come here, our energy, our commitments to be here in a university, right? So when it comes to reshaping truth, reshaping our lives, I think students need to come together to really realize that power, and to also make our realizations of power less than necessarily just symbolic or performative, which is some of the work that I do in YDSA, the Young Democratic Socialists of America, but also throughout my research and other meetings with other folks like this. So that was just what I would say briefly. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're actually starting with shorter openings, and then we're going to have more discussion. So that was right on point. And thank you so much, Hanaan. Our next panelist will be Alyssa Cazier.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to my fellow panelists and to Ben. I feel really honored to be here with so many other folks who I feel like are doing amazing work in the university and beyond. So one thing I want to talk about is this idea of resistance and care as a commitment to a democratic, just, and sustainable university. At various points in my life, and certainly as a graduate student, one thing that I'm constantly reminded of is that none of the work that we engage in, which seeks to enact change or leave a legacy behind, happens alone or in isolation. So what does it mean for a group of people, all with differential access to resources, power, and risk, but with a shared vision for shaping a university, a community, a society, to come together to resist the pressures of political coercion and manipulation? It's a really big ask of one another, and an ask that does not bear the same consequences for each individual. So while the current system does mean to divide us, I believe that the next system requires community, commitment, and care. Like so many of the panelists this morning, or I guess earlier this afternoon, were talking about this idea that solidarity cannot be sustained only as a vision of what we're fighting against, but rather we have to consider what we're fighting for. So bell hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, other Black feminist scholars urge us and remind us to ground our resistance and solidarity in a collective consciousness, which prioritizes a commitment to care and also challenges the cultural norms of a dominant ideology. This dominant ideology, which would have us believe that we need not be concerned for the threats that exist for others out there, or that will somehow remain insulated by the individualized privileges that we hold. It's true, we're not equally oppressed, but if we are to take seriously our shared reality, illuminated by a collective consciousness, then we're all implicated in building the next system to address the differential exploitation and oppression each of us experience. In the words of bell hooks, when we share our concern for the collective, we strengthen our solidarity. So speaking to the normative commitments of the university itself, for my field as a public sociologist, I really approach the work that I do as emancipatory and liberatory. So while there are certainly many perspectives on what it means to do public sociology and to be a public sociologist, the fundamental task at hand is to ask ourselves, what it is that we intend for our work to achieve within the field and within the university. Are we as scholars somehow separate from the public which we intend to study and identify social problems which we intend to intervene? My answer, of course, is that we are the public. We should and do have the same vested interest as any other member of a democratic society, no more, no less. However, we're also in a unique position, which lends itself to an amount of privilege and power in which we can harness the resources provided within the location of the university to cultivate stronger communities built on knowledge sharing, strategy, and collective care. Our task is thus to ensure that the work we do contributes to shared knowledge creation, investment into our own communities, and an intellectual practice that is rooted in care for each other. To challenge the ideological system which prioritizes economic development at the cost of our community, environment, and democracy. Ultimately, what we know from next system studies is that the university is contested terrain and that our collective struggles unite us intellectually, providing us the opportunity to construct and reconstruct the university as a space for the next system to emerge. So how do we get there? As I think is clear from what I've said so far, I don't believe that any one of us could answer this question. So what are the principles upon which we can build a collective and care-based strategy for building the next system? One framework that I personally draw from is the concept of bridge work, a solidarity building strategy that prioritizes an ongoing two-way relationship built on shared resources. The scholar activist Charlotte Ryan says that the practice of bridge work evokes mutuality, sustained commitment, and resultantly broader measures of success. For me, this practice requires us to be rooted in the kind of collective consciousness and care-based strategy that many of the feminist activists remind us is key to the success of a sustained movement. Specifically, the important lesson that bridge work offers for those of us in the university is that this practice relies critically on reciprocity and non-hierarchical relationships. Further, this bridge work warns us that hegemony is not just out there, but also lives in social movements, and they're susceptible to the constraints of a hegemonic reality. What this means for us is that the reality of the next system is not something which we can just wait to arrive. It's not just one panel, one teach-in, one movement. It's an exercise in collective care, strategy, and power building. Ultimately, the university in the next system acknowledges that economic competition creates a society in which interdependence is seen as a vulnerability. But our vision is democratic, sustainable, and just. Our responsibility is to ensure that these shifts happen holistically, both within the ivory tower and beyond.
Each of you are bringing me to tears, and I have to apologize to my colleague, Dr. Letiecq. I do wear Wisconsin on my sleeve, and also I'm still operating with the ed school mentality. So the College of Education and Human Development here at GMU. Please welcome Bethany.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm a little mad at my co-panelists because you all prepared, and I'm like, I thought we were in conversation. So I'll do my best to hang, but I do listening to you both. I'm always so reassured that the future is bright, the future is in good hands, and I trust that in solidarity with you, with my sisters up here and Ben. Uh, a little bit about me. I joined the faculty here at Mason in 2013, and I had come from Montana State University, where we had been organizing to establish a union there. And we had been working both within the channels of the university and outside of those channels to stand up that labor union. And during that time, I saw a lot about or recognized, how words aren't often meaningful without action, that, even faculty who say they're committed to certain things, are they willing to sacrifice to stand up and fight for those values, or is it too easy perhaps to be complacent or complicit in maintaining the status quo? Because who benefits from the status quo? Oftentimes it might be the very faculty. I came to Mason and very quickly realized, wow, there is not a lot of faculty power here. You went to the faculty senate. Back then, there was a deal with to change the name of the law school to the Anton Scalia School of Law, and the faculty senate was not happy about that. They tried to fight back and were rolled. They were absolutely rolled over, right? And seeing that and recognizing, okay, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here to build power, to hold people to account for their commitments. And so we looked around, and the American Association of University Professors, there was a chapter here. It was born in the late 1960s. There were stalwart AAUPers here fighting for academic freedom, for shared governance. They were fighting for those commitments. But they were not activated, let's say. We used to call it the Wine and Wine Club. We'd sit around and drink a bottle of wine and whine about the circumstances. But we weren't engaged in real power shifting work. And so through working with the AAUP and joining with national comrades, going through organizer training school, really thinking about how to build coalitions based on deep trust, relationship solidarity that includes coalitions with students, with other workers, with faculty at all ranks. How do we build something that is powerful, that through that power enforces our commitments, upholds those commitments? So what are those commitments? What is academic freedom? To me, academic freedom, and actually I worked with my graduate students and they came up with this, that academic freedom to them is the freedom to teach, to learn, to conduct research, and to be here, to be present without fear and without favor, to fight back against political interference, to be free to create, to not be afraid to say something in a classroom because you might be called a name or worse, disappeared from our campus and from our community and even from our society. There's lots of other commitments, right? There's the freedom of speech. There's the right to protest that has been severely curtailed, as you know, in recent years. There's also security of person. There's security around immigration matters. There's safety issues that are needed to protect one another. And I'd be remiss as a parent of a 16-year-old who's college seeking. College has got to be affordable, and it is the failure of our nation. It's the failure of our state. It's the failure of all of us to allow this kind of cost, inaffordability, and the debt that we're burdening families and young people with. It's something that, it's personal to me, but it's something that bothers me. And particularly at a public institution of higher education, a public regional institution, this place should be free. If it's not free, it should be wildly affordable. You should not go broke, and you should not have to think about, what major do I need to choose in order to land the kind of job that will allow me to pay off my debts. And you want to know why the humanities are suffering? I mean, it's all linked, right? Okay, so that's justice, incredibly important value, right, and commitment. So how do we get here? So in my view, I share your perspectives. We've got to confront power, right? Power at every level, and we've been demonstrating how to build power, how to organize to shift power, and we need to really think about. I heard earlier about the solidarity issues, and Patricia Collins also talks quite a lot about flexible solidarity, and it's a notion that I find really helpful. That if you share these common commitments, can we be flexible enough in our solidarity to get there together? I feel like how am I doing on time? Am I doing okay? Okay. Uh, so through that flexible solidarity, building those critical coalitions is really important. And this takes time, and it takes resource, and it takes commitment. And I often say that my work with the AAUP is my hobby. Like people say their hobby is, crocheting or something. I don't know what your hobby is, photography, or and how do you take care of yourself? And I actually sort of want to challenge, like for me, showing up in care, in solidarity with all of you weekly when we meet. You are my family. We care about each other. We take care. And it's my hobby and it's my passion that we are fighting for a more democratic higher education and a more democratic society. We know these things go hand in hand. And I have lots more to say, and I'm sort of rambling. So you get the sense of maybe where my heart is. So I'll stop there. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you so much. So I have a number of questions that you guys came up with collectively, and I have the opportunity to pick which one I want to pose first. I'm going to throw some of these to the panel, and we'll have very brief responses to the extent if you want to respond. If you don't, we can pass and we can open it up. But we'll start up here, and then we'll include more and more voices in the room. So actually, Bethany, you briefly alluded to an alternative model for universities when you're talking about abolishing tuition, right, or making universities free. And I'm just wondering, to the extent that each of you would like to, if you might speak to models for ways to design universities and colleges that are alternatives to what we have right now, and also examples or models for organizing and for winning system change in higher education that you're aware of, either that are happening right now across the US or in other parts of the world, or historical cases that inspire you. And you can remain seated and just use your mics. We'd like to take a crack at that. I want to go to you, Hanaan, since I think you raised this. Yeah.
Okay, so as I think Ben was trying to shove us in the direction of the Wisconsin model, the idea.
No.
No, but I think also not necessarily a specific model, but the idea of the university being very closely embedded within the community. I'm doing research right now for a public policy class on food deserts and food insecurity. And I was reading about a program in Loyola in Maryland. I don't know if that's how you say it, but they were talking about how specifically instead of just funding how do you say, like, fresh grocery programs straight through the government, the university was taking it upon themselves to do research and to be integrated in that way. And I'm not saying that universities don't do that right now. Obviously there are some universities doing that right now, but what I'm thinking about is the the commitment of the university being like in a larger portion towards that, being in investing in the community. Because I think especially when you look around the country, you'll you know, there are places in this country where you can like drive in like farmland in rural areas that were gutted by deindustrialization and things like that. You can drive for miles and then suddenly you stumble upon a university and it's beautiful and it's funded and it's full of people and this is a fantastic thing, but are they embedded within the community? Are they embedded within the town that they, you know, took up residence in, or if they're near? So I think that when I look to the future of universities, it should be like the university is not just on a hill above the town or the city that it's in, but it's very closely integrated. And that also students, when you join a university, you become part of that local community. You don't just like, if you come here, you don't just become part of campus, you become part of the Fairfax and the Northern Virginia and the DMV community. So something to that note is what my first assumption was.
Thank you. Either of you like to respond to that?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I loved what Bethany said. Obviously, I want college to be free. I think that that's a given. And I think even moving beyond the financial support that universities should offer, what kind of support would it look like if we were to actually care about each other as students and peers and as faculty members? I think, you know, we talk a lot in my cohort and my program of like how it's like impossible to get through a graduate program without having friendships. And I think that that's something that a lot of times, you know, a lot of the kind of scary stuff that I heard about joining, starting a PhD program was that it's incredibly isolating, it's incredibly lonely, the competition, like it's just really cutthroat. And I think me and some of my peers just made a decision to say like, no, we're not gonna do that. That's not what this has to be. And we can have a community that's more supportive. And what does that look like if faculty kind of supports students in a way that acknowledges the reality that we're in socially and the risks that each one of us have and how can they support us in that way. So all of this is really important, the financial aspects, and then I think going beyond that as well for support.
Just go to your next.
Okay, that's great. We've got more. I would be remiss though. I was reminded that there was something that took place in Madison, Wisconsin. That was a national convention. Yeah, I see you smiling back there. I agree. That was called the Education for Democracy Convention, that was convened because students at Rutgers University started camping out in the middle of campus. And it was a series of student strikes and teach-ins over precarity and the cost of education that they called Tent State University. And we worked with them to spread Tent State University across the United States, University of Missouri, Kansas City, UC Davis, University of Michigan, Wisconsin, a lot of big public universities that were actually met by a lot of violence, to be honest with you, but also a lot of mass participation. People don't know this story. And so we united with them. Out of that came something called the Democratizing Education Network. And I was like, does this still exist? But there was a charter that came out of this convention that included full public financing for public higher education. So that'd be a constitutional guarantee, free access to higher education and abolition of tuition, affirmative action to end institutionalized racism and sexism, full recognition of the rights of students and workers to organize in unions and engage in collective bargaining, democratic self-government of higher education. That would mean that all of us here take part in the governance directly of the institution, speaking to what Hanaan was speaking to. Service to the public welfare, not corporate profits. Free speech and academic freedom, so which we heard from Bethany especially. Debt forgiveness of student loans, which at that time was something that was not in the mainstream, and it was really driven into the mainstream by all that organizing. Civic education for a democratic society, and education not war, schools not jail. So those were the basic principles that came out. Yeah, go speak to that.
Oh, I just wanted to mention very briefly that a lot of that is also on the Young Democratic Socialists of America platform. So I think a lot of these ideas are definitely alive and well in campus organizing. It's a matter of bridging folks together and like truly working towards it.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, great. Another question that came up, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor, and then we'll see where we want to go with this, is has to do with this very moment. And there were allusions to this moment that each of you made, and also some sense of the history of what got us here. But this institution remains under investigation and under attack. Universities as a whole have been under attack in this year. And of course, other institutions, cities, communities, and neighborhoods are under an attack from above at this moment. So I'm curious about your thoughts about this very moment in terms of taking on the question of the next GMU. What are our responsibilities, and what is it that we must do at this moment, given for the urgency of the crisis? I'll start with Hanaan. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Or I'll start with Bethany. Okay.
Honored.
Thank you.
It should be. So it was on.
Is that working? Yeah, great. Thanks for the question, Ben. I actually wanted to continue on a little bit of a history tour because I think it speaks to one, the fact that what we're experiencing right now is not new. The seeds of this were planted a long time ago. You probably know George Mason University is the recipient of the most money from the Charles Koch Foundation, for example, than any other university in the world. Charles Koch established the Institute for Humane Studies, the Mercatus Center, funds things like the Center for Economics and the Law or something like that. And one of his goals was to, this libertarian philosophy of Charles Koch that really helped to build this university. It's anti-worker, it's anti-labor, it's anti-climate. We named a building after James Buchanan. In the darkness of night, there wasn't like a big movement by the faculty or students to have that building renamed. When you look at Buchanan's record, some suggest, he wasn't very favorable to, a multiracial democracy, shall we say. So one, and I do community-based participatory research, and I work in partnership with communities, mainly with immigrant communities and indigenous communities in Montana and here in Virginia. And I just always want to say, like, I've been, working in communities who have been living with a heightened fear of deportation and family separation, mass incarceration, and extreme social marginalization and exclusion for a very long time. So, while what is happening right now is terrifying, it has a long life to it, right? And it's just grown. So with regard to I did sort of want to talk about the fight back in a way, like as a future, as a model too. And a real quick story, cycling back to what I talked about when I landed here and trying to understand the political interference, the undue interference of donors, et cetera, at this university. One thing I learned really quick was what was happening with student organizing. So Transparent GMU at the time was demanding transparency around gift agreements. Like, what undergraduate student gives a crap about gift agreements? But these students cared about gift agreements, and they were FOIAing the university, and they were trying to find out, what did you get for the giving? How is this university being structured, and how are donors benefiting from that? And as part of that deep coalition work, GMU's AAUP chapter worked with the students and worked with other organizations nationally to demand this transparency. And an amazing thing happened along the way. The students' work actually resulted in the discovery of these gift agreements that were made public because they sued the state, they sued the university over this. And it was then that we were ready to mobilize to change some of the policies, rules, and standards at the university to begin to take back the university from this undue donor influence. That kind of work, that deep organizing work, students working both within the university, faculty working both within the university and working outside the university to put pressure on the university to uphold its commitments to transparency and equities, to thwart undue donor influence. These are really important moves. We have a history of all of this, this history of struggle, the contested spaces. And we also can learn deeply from those past movements, what was successful about those movements, what was successful in terms of building power as a collective, and how we can continue to do that work going forward. And we have continued to do that work. GMU AAUP is a much more powerful entity than it was 10 years ago. If you have any doubt, just listen to the last BOV meeting when we were clearly in their headspace. It was a wonderful thing to see. So I think I think this is a part of the future. The part of reclaiming a university is owning it. And that requires shifting power, and it requires that shifting power, but that means we have to change. The change isn't out there, it's in this room. We have to change our orientation to this work. And I think that's just going to be really critical.
I think, yeah, very well said. I was thinking about this, I guess, in a more broad lens. I think one of the very unique things about George Mason is that compared to other Virginia public universities, this is an extraordinarily young university, right? You have some of maybe the oldest public universities in this state, right? Where I have friends who go there. And they have, ways of doing things, institutions, methods that are very deeply entrenched in those 100, 200, 300, et cetera, year old systems, right? But whereas here at Mason, as a university that's only just a little older than 50 years old, there's a lot of opportunity for us to change what this university could still be. And in fact, it's changing every day, right? We're the most diverse university in Virginia, probably one of the most diverse on the East Coast. We're the biggest public university in Virginia, one of the biggest in the area, right? So and then we're also located near the nation's capital, right? So all of these things about Mason, we're primed for creating change. We have all of these things in our hands that we need to utilize effectively. And I think especially in the moment that we're in, facing extreme repression, but also that repression bringing people into spaces where they want to fight back against it in the university and in communities is a very, it's a silver lining to the terrible situation that we're in. And also we're coming into a period where we may have a governor who's more friendly to us than the current governor is, and we may therefore have a board of visitors who is more friendly to us than the current board of visitors is. So all of this, I'm saying, we are primed for extreme potential. But if we just sit around and we don't know what to do with it, then that's a failure on our parts because we have this moment of great transition that we need to utilize effectively. So that's something that I hone a lot in university organizing is that, when we recruit, when we have people interested, we need to make sure they're coming in not just, to hang out, to meet people, but to do things, right? So I think, not to indict all of you all, but on the left, we have a bit of an obsession about being right? We don't not on the political right, but being correct, right? Being, vindicated by history, right? Which we always are. But do we effectively take up moments? I don't know if that's true. So what I want is, because we're in this moment of great possibility coming into the next year, to have systems or movements that prioritize student power, free speech, academic freedom, things like that, coming into the next year and knowing what we're going to do when we have this availability and this power in front of us.
Anything major to add, because Hanaan said amazingly everything that I would say, but that we do have this pivotal moment that's right in front of us. And, you know, we talk about like kind of folks doubling down in these ways that is problematic, but like we can double down too. And we can just say like, yes, we have these strengths, we have these opportunities, like let's go for that. And everything that you all said, I agree with fully.
You can apply for that too. I'm going to open it up just in case there are things that are percolating out there that people want to offer. Knowledge that you have, questions, things you've been struggling with. Don't hold back. I had a number of people come up to me at the end of the last session and said, I was just holding back because I wanted to hear what other people had to say, but you have something to say too. So is there anybody who'd like to pose something for the floor or for the panel and get us going? Okay, excellent. And let's, here we go. And I just also want to recognize there are a number of people here who have been part of Next System Studies in different roles over the years. Gabriel Gonzalez was in the first cohort of Next System Fellows and is on staff as our communications officer these days. So sorry to out you. But,
Yeah, no,
but
I was
also
going to
happy
bring it
to do
up
that.
anyway.
Yeah.
As a former student, now as staff here, I've become acutely aware of the amount of interference that the governor and the Board of Visitors has at this university. And I'm curious to know what you guys think, the whole panel, of the new opportunities that arise and how realistic we should be when it comes to our optimism that a new governor has been elected who's potentially maybe more friendly. Oh no, will be more friendly, but to the extent that that friendliness will be beneficial, I guess it's up to us. But yeah, my question was that.
Yeah, thank you. So that's in a way a follow-up on what Hanaan was putting forward, but then the question is, what do we actually do? And you raised that in terms, I think you called it extreme potential. So yeah, so Gabriel saying, what do we do with that extreme potential? Thank you.
If I may answer. Well, one thing that I think that a trap that a lot of folks might fall into is just saying that we want to go back to whatever normal was, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? And we're under Democratic leadership again, not to say it, but when we're under Democratic leadership again, by a centrist Democrat, do we want to return to what the status quo is, or do we want to push past that? So I think when we're organizing, we need to be very aware that like just going back to the past is not enough, because then we're just going to get into this situation again. This is something that we emphasize a lot in Next System Studies, that the status quo got us to this point, right? So I think in terms of pragmatism, that again, you can't be too hopeful. I don't think we can imagine that Abigail Spanberger is going to give us everything that we want, loath as I am to say it. But that I think that we do realize also that within this moment, it's the time to ask for things. And it's also the time to frame those asks within the institutions that we have to make it better for us to organize for what comes afterwards. Like, for example, well, this is a very big disappointment of mine, but that the incoming governor is not favorable to overturning right to work, which I'm sure, Bethany, you can also speak to. But however, we also are in the position of a Democratic, almost a supermajority in the House of Delegates, right? No one expected that, really. So how can we utilize that moment to ask for demands that are attainable? And then how can those demands within institutions make it easier for us to organize and to push into a next system moment?
I love that question and appreciate your answer. Yeah, it's been amazing to watch how Governor Youngkin and Attorney General Meares have how they've plotted to really sort of take over both, I would say, UVA and Mason in some pretty fundamental ways through the boards. My read is that the governor couldn't do what other states are doing, couldn't move the legislature, so started attacking, you know, from within, right? Like going after the boards and really putting political ideologues on the board that were willing to move Youngkin's agenda, not the people's agenda, you know, not the students' agenda, not the faculty's agenda, but Youngkin's politicized agenda. And so I think it's exciting that we find ourselves in this position. But I agree that this is not the time to let up at all. In fact, it's the time we should be mobilizing hard, which means join an organization, join your AAUP chapter, and join with us in pushing really hard, because this is the moment. You know, I mean, like, bills are being filed. I think that it closes on December 1st or something like that. And we need to get the right kind of language in those bills to build the kind of structure that we want. So, you know, I think I am very pleased that to-be Governor Spanberger has already written a letter to UVA, to the board, saying, don't even think about, you know, messing with installing a president, you know, cease and desist, essentially. Right now, we would like her to do the same thing at Mason. It's still a concern that the board, they do not have a quorum, but they've still taken actions, standing up, you know, a law school foundation, you know, with an executive committee. It boggles my mind, but so we have to stay alert right now. And then when power shifts, be ready with those demands. And I am personally hoping that she will replace our board, just replace it. I think they have acted with malfeasance, and she has the power to replace that board. And we need to rebuild that board with people who care about George Mason University, its people, and not some political agenda that most of us don't subscribe to. So I'm excited. I do think that you know, we have opportunities to get collective bargaining for graduate students, to get collective bargaining for faculty. That is going to be a huge lift. There are advocacy days and lobby days coming up in January. If you're interested, you know, we'd love to have people join us because showing up matters. Showing up matters. Showing up is a display of power, and it matters. And we must show up.
Thank you. Other questions or interventions? I want to, in some ways, create a little bit of friction here. So Bethany knows that I've already raised this before in other places, but you know, are we really answering Gabriel's question, I guess, right? And also taking on the challenge you put out, Hanaan, about sort of not simply going back. So expanding, you know, winning the right to organize for faculty and for graduate students, graduate workers would be a big expansion, right? Here at GMU. And we fought for that at Wisconsin in 1970, and then we went for faculty just 15 years ago. And that made a big difference when faculty got the right to engage in collective bargaining and to have a union that was recognized by the state. That's what that means for those who aren't familiar with that. But what about students who are undergraduates, right? What about, you know, the majority of you in this classroom who are students who work for a living on campus or elsewhere, or simply work because you're students? What about the question of the governance of the institution? You know, in terms, so, you know, at Wisconsin, we saw in the 1990s, we were fighting the Board of Regents, and we exposed who they were and their white supremacy in some cases. And we made fun of them, and they actually became widely known and kind of despised across the state. And we're able to get some restructuring of the Board of Regents. Not what we wanted, which was a fully elected Board of Regents for the entire state, with students getting a third of the seats, faculty and staff getting a third of the seats, and a third of them elected at large. But we got some reforms, right? But we didn't get what we wanted, right? We got a few more students on the board. We didn't get the fully democratized board. Then we had a Democrat win election. He appointed a bunch of liberals. They were generally nicer to students and faculty. And then a Republican got elected, and then it was the same thing again, right? So I guess my question is, and this isn't so much about sort of what the vision is for the university, although I'm sort of challenging us on that, but also maybe it's more a question of what is the process? This would be a question for everybody here. What's the process through which we can move from AAUP and Young Democratic Socialists and the student government and whatever activist groups you're a part of, and many people here are part of different groups, right? From working together to actually developing a common agenda for a next university, for a different public university system in Virginia entirely. So what would it take to move from coalition and alliance to like a campaign for restructuring public higher education in the state? And I was sort of asking us, prodding us to sort of move further around that, and with no disrespect at all, because the showing up and the leadership and the being on the line is something that is, I mean, you've done amazing work there, but I'm also challenging you a little bit because of the leadership that you provided. How much further can we go, and how would we get ourselves collectively to do that? And that's for you, but also for all of us.
I haven't talked too much, so I want to hear from
Thank you.
others or others. What do you think about Ben's question?
Well, I don't know that I'm gonna have a great answer, but I'm gonna just share some thoughts, which from earlier in the panel, I think one thing that really struck me was this idea of moving past campaigns and building institutions, and like, what are the institutional powers and mechanisms that we can kind of take advantage of from within. And I think, you know, kind of what you're talking about, Ben, is this idea that, you know, instead of getting, okay, the undergrad RSOs together and getting the AAUP together and getting, you know, these different groups, communities of people within the university, like we are the university, like all of us are the university. And we're talking about a democratic university, we're talking about one person, one vote, right? So I think if we kind of and thinking about the asks of the governor and the you know, the opportunities for a new board of visitors, like how can we kind of start to entrench these mechanisms as a more democratic university for each of us individually, but also collectively, versus just, okay, we have a student body representative, we have a grad student representative, we have an AAUP representative. Like, how can we kind of start to create these institutional mechanisms that are just one person, one vote, doesn't matter the community representative you are a part of the university and a part of the collective. I don't know that that is super cogent, but
I think also, how do I say this? I think that there needs to be like a wider realization, this is work that we all have to do, but a wider realization that like to decision makers and those who have more power over the university, that the university is not the administration, it's not the board of visitors, it's not the president, it's us, right? It's faculty and it's students and it's staff. We, you know, you hear this number a lot, that George Mason has 40,000 students combined, right? But that number doesn't really seem to mean anything to leadership except the fact that it gets them more money and more funding, right? So what does it mean to be democratic? I think part of it means realizing the weight of that number, the weight of how many faculty members there are, how many students there are, you know, undergrad and graduate, right? And that democratic representation, you know, in sense, you know, it means that like, as Alyssa and Ben were saying, that like just a few student seats on like, for example, a board of visitors is not comparative or not proportional to the entire student body, right? I think it means also, like, I think for like a lot of us here in this room, we understand that democracy is something that you do every day, right? It's not just something that you do in the polls. But I think it's also, you know, forcing other people to, not to use such harsh language, but making other people aware of that, right? That, you know, when we want democracy, it means that it needs to be proportional and that it can't just be symbolic. And I think that that's going to have to happen by, you know, really like when we do something like, for example, in student government or faculty senate or something like that, making sure that it doesn't just disappear, that we're annoying about it, right? That people don't forget about it, which is, I think, really necessary, because otherwise it's just gonna stay symbolic. It's gonna stay symbolic if we keep acting like it's symbolic, but if we take it very seriously, if we take the work we're doing very seriously, then I think that's essential. Like, I'm working on a campaign with some other organizations that involve student government right now. If you want to know, you can talk to me about it. I don't know if I should be saying it on recording, but if you want, I think a lot of folks are kind of asking me and asking other leaders, like, why are we doing all of this work? It's just student government, it's just symbolic. And we're like, if you treat it as symbolic, then it becomes symbolic, right? But if we're very serious about it, and if we treat it with the weight that it deserves, because, this is our futures on the line, right? Our very fundamental freedoms, then that's kind of, it creates, the spaces for us to use that power. So I think, not just to say that we can manifest it into being, but like, it is very important to have conviction in what you're doing and to not just act like I'm just here just to do it.
Can I just quickly ask before, so I don't know if you were referencing the IHARA resolution, is that?
It is what I'm referring.
Okay, so there's a resolution that's gonna come up in this room later, for student government. Basically, a resolution, calling for the rollback of the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition as the definition that is being used to define anti-Semitism, which, most Jewish faculty and students who I know, including me, find quite insulting, that was adopted by a bunch of non-Jews as a way to define anti-Semitism, since our own criticisms of Israel are defined as anti-Semitism under that. But that resolution is coming up, and I just wanted to.
4:30.
At 4:30 in this room. So those of you who are undergraduate or graduate students and also faculty, may want to be here if you're able to be. But just to speak to what you were saying, yesterday, a student activist approached me at my office to tell me that they had been pulled aside by campus police for putting up posters in Horizon Hall, and basically calling on people to attend the student government meeting to vote on the resolution. So I think this speaks not only to the sort of micro targeting and the level of repression that is constant against student activists who speak out on behalf of the human rights of the Palestinian people and also on behalf of academic freedom, but also on the importance of the resolution. As you were saying, it does have power. Obviously, the mere act of, and I have photographs of the poster, they're totally inoffensive. They basically just say, come and speak out for academic freedom and against genocide. That it is relevant.
Yeah, and I think that also, like, to say what Ben was saying, and to also connect to my previous point, that our opposition, people who don't want academic freedom or free speech, or for us to speak up against war crimes going on that our university may be complicit in, our opposition takes symbolic gestures very seriously, right? Because they see it as indicative that the political climate and that the organizational climate is changing. Because the fact is that I think a lot of us need to realize that we are not just like a little minority, right? That people agree with us, and we need to act like people agree with us. And that means that, making these gestures of like, something that maybe like consider like quote unquote symbolic, like a resolution, it still speaks to a large portion of the student body, of faculty, and things like that. So basically what I'm saying is if your opponents take quote unquote symbolic gestures seriously, so should you.
Thank you. Bethany.
Thank you. The GMU chapter of the AAUP has endorsed or co-sponsored that resolution, by the way, and I'm happy that I was able to speak on that, and all the ways in which it chills, our speech, right? Not just students, but faculty too in the classroom, and what it's like. I was talking to a reporter yesterday, and he was asking about what it's like to work at Mason right now, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's even chilling just to talk about racial justice. Feels like it's daunting to talk about, well, how do we create a university where, for example, where students see themselves in their faculty in all kinds of ways, But when you have such an incredibly diverse student body, and then you have a faculty that isn't, you know, is that important? Does it matter? I mean, I think it does. I think it does matter. But that the fact that we can't even talk about, you know, diversifying the faculty without fear of some DOJ investigation, a fourth or a fifth or a sixth, you know, is just how chilly is that? And so, you know, I have the privilege of teaching an anti-colonial methods course. I'm probably not the right person to teach the course, but I've had a lot of experiences thinking about these different kinds of methods. You know, knowledge creation. We talk about you know, all the ways in which knowledge is created and which knowledge matters and which knowledge is valued. And, you know, how do we democratize knowledge? Knowledge is power. Like, how do we democratize knowledge? How do we share it? We talk about the rules of the university. We talk about the rules of what it takes to move up into job security here. You know, how many faculty don't have job security? How many faculty feel so threatened that they come up to me all the time and they say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for everything you're doing, but I don't want to ever be seen standing next to you because I don't want to lose my job. I mean, it's bananas. This is, you know, if we're talking about a democratic university and a democratic society, people here, they operate within a system of fear. Whether that fear is real or imagined, it doesn't matter to me. Like, you're still operating within a system of fear. And I say all the time, you know, like, but we can fight together, but it still feels very, very scary. And this was before Trump, right? I mean, like, this is before the DOJ. It's just, you know, getting sort of worse. So I love spending time unlearning. I read a lot about unlearning. How do we unlearn, you know, the things that we've been socialized to value, the hierarchies, the structures. And I think a lot about how I move and what agency do I have to move differently within the university as it exists right now. And your question, Ben, just makes me think about, you know, I get so constrained by the current system. It doesn't allow me to be free. It doesn't allow me to be my full self in all of my humanity. It just does not allow me to do that. It is incredibly constraining. So when I think about your question, if I really open it up, you know, you know, it scares me to talk about dismantling, because I used to talk about dismantling, and then like the Department of Education is being dismantled. And I'm like, I'm not exactly sure that that's what I meant when I talked about dismantling. But you know, how, you know, can we do that from within this system, a system that was not built for everyone? You know, can we do that? Can we build from within? Do we have to conceive of something really different? And I think I don't lack the courage most days to think about what is possible outside of this space. But I love the question, and I do try to think about every day, what agentic acts can I do to embody at a cellular level the commitments and, you know, the world that I want to see and who I want to be in that world. And I try within this place to do that work. You know, but I recognize that, you know, I need to continue to just be in relationship with so many others who are committed to that challenge.
Alyssa, you're included too.
Yeah, so no, I'll stop there. I think I'm talking too much. So.
Are there questions in the chat? Are there questions in the chat?
The question was, were there questions in the chat?
We have one question from Dave. The rest are comments.
Speak to it, and then I'll go to Alyssa on the first response. Yeah.
Dave said we need new structures for governance. how do we find the people who are to lead various institutions? How are they elected, and how do they make decisions?
Thank you.
Well, I don't know that I was quite ready for that
That's
question,
fine.
but
We got it on the floor.
okay,
Yeah.
I do think that maybe this kind of ties in, because what I wanted to touch on was what both Bethany and Hanaan are talking about. I think is a good opportunity to also kind of return to this idea of like resistance as care, and this idea that like some of us are in positions to take on a heavier amount of risk, and like what does it mean for us to kind of, you know, put ourselves on the line. And I'm constantly thinking about like my role in the university, but then also in the community, and how I can both do this resistance work while caring for my community and making sure that I'm keeping them safe. So I think while that doesn't directly answer the question of leadership and kind of this, you know, this new institution that we can build, I do think that some of us have to acknowledge that it makes sense for us to take on more risk than someone else. And what does that mean? And how can we do that in a way that's still rooted in our community and still rooted in the kind of care and like collective consciousness that we want to create, while acknowledging that like, hey, I'm the person that maybe needs to like step out and do this for my community.
Thank you. Others out here, something new. It could be something that you hadn't thought about before, something that you were provoked to think about based on the discussion, something you're struggling with and have difficulty putting into words, or something you feel some urgency around. What other kinds of interventions do we have? Oh, okay. We're going to have Gabriel go again, which is fine. We'll just bring you up on the panel, which honestly, I was thinking that earlier. We have so many people.
Yeah,
here.
no, this panel has been incredibly generative for me, so that's why I have a lot to say.
Yeah, good.
But speaking of alternatives and possibilities, I had the fortune of going to Latin America about a year ago, and I got to experience the way they do universities. I went during an election of electing rectors.
This is in Bolivia, right?
Bolivia. Bolivia is actually unique in that students and faculty have an equal say in electing their rectors. And it was completely foreign to me as an American university student at the time to see university admin in the way they weren't literally begging for votes, but they were essentially begging the students to vote for them. Yeah, campaigning. It was so foreign to me, and the fact that how separate the university is from the state. I asked my cousin who attends that university, do the police ever come on campus? And she's like, no, never in my life, never in my parents' life have I ever thought of the idea that police would be on campus. But in America, that's like every university, every large university has their own police department. Like that's so strange to other parts of the world, but to me, that's like, oh, that's just how American universities are. And then I had never challenged that idea until I had left the country, and I realized that's not actually normal. But yeah, I didn't have much of a question, just with thoughts.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
very helpful, and thank you. And I saw Nara shaking her head. You know, Brazil, the same thing. Greece, it's in the constitution. The police were barred from universities following the defeat of the regime there, because the student movement said we've had enough violence from the police. And I'll say, until the mid-90s at University of Wisconsin at Madison, coming out of the student movement, we had a campus police force, but they stayed out of the dorms. They were barred from the dorms. They're barred from, you know, student wards. That was actually a legacy here in the US too. In many places, the culture changed, the practices changed, then the institutions changed, right? But it's even part of our own history. But you can see it much more vibrantly in other places. Also across the border in Quebec, closer to home. There are other models to look to. So I'm so glad you brought that. Also look to Chile, where the former, one of the former leaders of the student movement in Chile in 2019 was referenced as president of Chile right now. So, maybe Hanaan can be our last president until we get rid of that institution. Yeah. Others. Yeah. Let's bring it over here to our colleague, president. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. This was a fascinating panel. I have learned a lot and I took a lot of notes. Thank you so much. I just want to add, expand on the care point because it's actually my interlocutors, activist interlocutors in Lebanon around 10 years ago. I learned the importance of care because they were reading people that I were not reading at the time, Black feminist thinkers. So in my education, PhD, before PhD, I was like, oh, self-care is neoliberal. It's bad. I want to expand with the self-care. It's neoliberal. It's bad. If I do it, I will be co-opted in the system. That was my training and education. But then, I have it in the book in introduction too. One of my interlocutors who identifies a feminist activist in Lebanon quoted for me and a very famous quote. I know it's very famous right now, but at the time I didn't know. From Audre Lorde, I'm going to read it. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. That really struck me at the time. And I'm like, I never thought that way. So I think it's also important, that kind of critique coming from Black feminists against like more mainstream critiques of neoliberalism. I mean, we or anyone, and I tell this to my students, should not, feel ashamed of self-care. Self-care is good. It's not necessarily neoliberal. So if there are things that can be co-opted by neoliberalism, of course, there's a lot of, neoliberal promotion of self-care, individualism, etc. But it can also be like very radical and it can be practiced in very radical ways. So caring for each other, but also caring for ourselves is very, very important.
Can I
Excellent.
address
Yeah,
the
please,
point?
no, please do. And what I'll just say is, respond, also offer any closing thoughts that each of you have, and we'll wrap with that. And then after each of you have shared some closing thoughts, please stick around and hang out and meet people you haven't met as well.
To respond to the professor very briefly, I think also like this idea of self-care within like academia and education is kind of like not really confronted very often because there's this idea that like the grind set mentality or like locking in, like that's kind of the virtuous thing that you should be doing in university. Like, you have 5 papers due in one night, so you should be sitting down and doing it. Or, you turn to like AI to like generate it for you.
Right.
So I think like the crisis that we like the quote unquote crisis that we see in education right now is kind of formulated from like the worth ethics that we promote within universities that kind of we take with us into the workplace. And I think that to offer closing thoughts, to make that into closing thoughts, that I think that going back to my first point about like social reproduction and the truths that we face, like if we are to kind of for a lot of us to become adults, to become, formulated like working people in universities, then we need to make universities places that we create the people that we want to be, but also the people we want to work with, the people we want to be taught with, the people we want to be around, the people that, make up our neighborhoods and communities. Because, not to say that everyone goes to college, of course not. But what I am saying is that colleges create the people who head our university or head the universities, head institutions, head other things. So I think very much like reforming universities and reshaping and creating new systems of universities is very much creating new systems just in general. The next system is very much housed in the university, and I think that's why it's so essential for this project to be housed here at Mason.
Thank you for sharing about that too, and I can't wait to read your book, by the way. Yeah, I think, and this, I'll kind of pick up something that Bethany said as well, which is like, I think the idea for me and to kind of like bring this back as a conclusion is that resistance is care, and that the work, the kind of pep talk that I would give to others is like, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know what you're doing to like get into this work. I'm new to organizing. I'm new to the university. I had a whole career before I came to academia, and I felt really out of place for a while. And then I was like, what am I thinking? Like all of the skills and who I am as a person, like that matters here too. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think thinking about self-care and thinking about the things that really like enrich me as a person are, the kinds of resistance that I get to do with community here, and the ways in which I've been building that kind of like those relationships, and that feels really refilling to me, you know, when the energy is low and you're with your people and you're doing something and you're like getting shit done and you're winning stuff, it feels amazing. So I think that that's kind of the message for me, is that it's not a one or the other, it's both. It is, resistance is care. And I think if we take that with us, it kind of brings us to a place of hopefulness, and we can actually talk about building something.
You took the word that came to mind for me, and it's I think about like what gets me out of bed in the morning, like what like why am I hopeful? Like why do I have optimism? I sometimes don't, like why? And I believe that I do believe that when we come together, that we can that we can impose our will to create the kinds of conditions that will support care and these other freedoms, not just to live a dignified life, but one where you can be creative and you can you know, answer the questions, explore, inquire, and you know, and I have seen how power operates. I study now. I study power now. I study systems change and power. I used to document people's suffering because I was taught that, you know, if you document people's suffering and you share that suffering, see how they're suffering, that would motivate you to action, to stop the suffering over there. But it turns out that's a really flawed theory of change. I'm drawing upon Eve Tuck's work when she talks about how flawed that theory is, because we're proving it today. We're seeing suffering all over the place, and we're still acting in many ways as if life is normal. I don't know. It's kind of bizarre to me. But when we come together and we have a common purpose and we work to that end, we have power, we have agency, and we can make the change that we want to see in the world. I absolutely believe that we have documented that through many of the the good works that we've done as collectives here at Mason across the country. And that brings me a great sense of hope that as we're thinking about next systems, new systems, that we can create. I do believe that we can create something. We are not powerless, and we are not subjects of the state. That we can make the changes that are necessary. You know, so that we don't have to talk about self-care, right? Because we've created the world that is nurturing, that it nurtures us, and we don't have to work any differently for our own dignity and for a good life. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bethany, Hanaan, and Alyssa. Thanks to all of you. It's really been a joy to spend some time with you today. I do want to remind you that other parts of the teach-in are still taking place. There will be sessions here at Fairfax and at Arlington campus in Mason Square tomorrow morning. You're welcome to join those online or in person. We have the room for a little bit, so I think we can hang out. And if you came and you did not sign in, please sign in on the sheet over there so that we can make sure to follow up and so on. And anything else? Oh, thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.